Chapter 21 The Plane World. They drift on the stellar currents. Usually they're boring as hell, but occasionally they contain heretical technologies. Vast stockpiles of treasure or a plague monster that wipes out 100 planets. It's always a roll of dice. Horatian Vangel, Ruin Mapper, year 29,941,003. "What's all this about?" Jun asked as she emerged from the stairwell behind her. "There's something you should all see," said Reginald from behind the wheel. He pointed towards the line in the sky. It was a pale gray and oddly perfect in its straightness, like a god had taken a knife to the void itself. "Oh," said Jun. "What is it?" Sule asked. "Disease, death, monsters," grumbled Rowan. "It's a plane world," said Reginald. "We didn't see it at first because we're facing it from the other side." "What's a plane world?" Sule thought. "An artificial construct," said Samuel, "ancient with optimized surface area for the ethereal environment." The true size of the plane world quickly dawned on Sule as she drew closer and time passed. The line would only grow longer and wider, until it seemed to stretch in either direction forever. She could clearly see that on the dark side of the plane world it was covered in snow-capped mountains, and on the other she could just make out the green of vegetation on the top side, basking in the light of an opportune star. It was clear now that the boundary line that separated the two faces was not at all flat, but was jagged mountains cast in a thin band of blue atmosphere. Both sides were the top, or the bottom. Sule tilted her head so that she was looking at it upside down. There were waterfalls that fell off the sides, curling into snow as it crossed into the shadow of the mountains beneath. "Have you ever seen anything else like it?" said Sule with awe, her mouth agape. "Only in stories," said Reginald. "They coast in the stellar wind like sails. Nobody knows where they came from, but most assume they were built by the gods or something close. Usually they're uninhabited because of how they move, but we'll find out in a moment." The drive thrummed louder as Chorst upped the gravity to compensate for the world, and the Sophie's sails carried her upwards, towards the tantalizing shine of color. The edge of the plane world was barren like the surface of a dead moon, and it slid past at a dizzying speed. Then, without warning, the Sophie was cast in brilliant, blinding sunlight. Sule squinted. It was grassland, for as far as the eye could see. It was a brilliant green, and the sky glowed with a beautiful blue light, dotted with bubbly white clouds. There were lonesome, distant mountains, sharp and tall and colossal in size, twisting and leaning every which way. "Oh my," said Jun. "Would you look at that?" The plane world looked as though it stretched in all directions. One second they had been hurtling through the deep, and the next they were here, wherever here was. When Sule leaned over the edge of the railing to look behind them, the darkness of space was already fading amidst the blue. There were patches of bare metal exposed between the grass and the rolling hills. They glinted in the sun, free of rust despite their evident age. As Chor slowed the Sophie's ascent, they began to move forwards, drifting by one of the curious mountains. Sule thought that there was something off about the whole thing. The way it was skinny and bent, it was unlike any mountain she had ever seen. Far in the distance she could see more of the structures, some far more collapsed than the others. They weren't mountains after all, she realized with a start. They were the remains of towering metal buildings. "People lived here once," said Jun, "in another time, long, long ago." "It'll take a while to cross," said Reginald. "We'll stop up ahead and tub up on water." Reginald had Chorsk park the Sophie on the peak of a hill next to a winding creek. Before them there were two of the mountain towers, perilously twisted and leaning towards each other in a great downward-facing arch. For a long time after the drive fell silent, no one moved. It was tense. The only sound was a gentle breeze. There was a stillness to the place that felt distinctly outer. It wouldn't last, thought Sule. Sule slung her pack over her shoulder. She found her way down and through the grass that swayed gently in the breeze. The air was cool and crisp against her bare legs, and the sun warmed her skin. As she strode down the hill, a flock of tremendously spherical birds took flight. They rolled through the air on stubby wings. She stopped at a hill to spread her arms wide and let the warmth and the wind wash over her, seeing it in the strand as an invisible river. She had so many questions. She wanted to see all the wonders the universe had to offer. There wasn't enough time to see everything. There was so much that she would never see, so much that she would miss. It was a sad thought. If only she could live forever, so that then she could see every wonder that life could hold. What would it be like to experience everything? She found Reginald a good walk from the ship at the edge of a broad lake. He sat in a collapsible chair with a notebook and a bag of scrolls, deep in thought. "Plotting?" Sule asked. Reginald looked up, his eyes regarding her. "Yes." "It's a lovely day to do some plotting," said Sule, climbing into the crystal clear water, which stopped at her shins. A school of tiny spherical and exceptionally orange fish nibbled between her toes. Reginald sighed. "Yes." "We could stay," said Sule, the words tumbling out. "Hide the Sophie. No one would ever find us here." "And do what? Watch the grass grow until we starve? This isn't home, Sule. Hiding isn't living." He turned to look at her, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. "The Sophie is the only real home we've got." Reginald looked out over the lake. A shadow passed over them, and they looked up. "Spinner whale," Reginald breathed with a flicker of wonder. The fact that they could see it at all was a testament to its size. Its body was wrapped in a tapestry of reflective silk sails, organic in the way that it flowed out into its wide tail. It was the only thing about the creature that Sule thought looked reminiscent of a water whale. From each side of its body they rippled like fins, and they turned, and it spun slowly and then dipped back below the edge of the plain world. "Are you worried, Sule?" Reginald asked quietly. "You could go. Maybe it's better that way. Go into hiding. We're wanted by the entire rim, even the revisionists, Jezebel, or whatever it is we let loose." "I'm worried about you," said Sule. She wasn't worried about herself. She wasn't sure that if she died, whether that would really be the end. She'd survived death once before, after all. For a moment, she imagined that she was the only one to survive again, and she shivered. "I'm the one who already lived his life," said Reginald, frowning. "Do you have dreams, Sule?" "I think so," she said. She still hoped that one day she'd be happy, that she'd truly belong, and that the world would stop hating her. She'd show them. She'd prove it somehow, that she was better than they thought, that she mattered. "I gave up on mine a long time ago," said Reginald sadly. "And that's why I don't belong in this picture. I'm worn out. I've moved on from me." "That's not true," Sule whispered. "I've got one last place in mind we could go," Reginald said. He stood and began packing his things into a bag. "It's time we talked with the others." They walked back to the ship. As they crested the last hill, Sule saw Rowan sitting next to a creek, her back to them. Reginald's shoulders tightened as her sobs carried upwards. Rowan must have sensed them watching, because she stopped and turned her head, seeing them standing on the hill. She stood, wiped her face with her sleeve, and walked stiffly back to the Sophie. Magnus was waiting on the deck, leaning against the railing with an infuriatingly calm expression. "A productive walk, I hope." Rowan stopped dead at the top of the gangway, her body rigid. "Get away from me," she said with a venomous snap. My dear girl, Magnus began, holding up his hands. I understand you're still upset, but... Upset? She shrieked. But my brother is dead. He's a smear of light in the God's damned hell because of your plan. She lunged, but Jun was there in an instant, grabbing her. Rowan struggled like a caged animal. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you, you filthy, backing Alcuer. Enough, Reginald's voice boomed as he stormed onto the deck. Why? Felix's voice cut in from the pilot house as he leaned against the wall. She's not wrong. We follow you, you follow him, and Miro ends up dead. Maybe someone else needs to start making the decisions. Reginald went rigid. He looked from Felix's blank expression to the sobbing mess that was Rowan, and then around at the doubtful faces as they gathered around him. You wanted, he roared, his voice cracking with repressed fury. He took a step towards Felix, his hands clenching into fists. You want to be the captain, Felix. You want to make the call that gets the next person killed? You want the responsibility? Fine. What's the plan, Felix? Do you know how to pay off the debt to Crace before he kills us? Where are we going? How are we going to get there? How are we going to stay alive for one more goddamn day with every soul outside this ship trying to kill us? Tell me. Decide. The deck was silent, and Felix looked away. Jun stepped forwards. We're all tired, Reg, she said, and we're all scared. Organtulans are never scared, interrupted Enar. We have no nightmares. They were slain in honorable combat during the first ascension. Jun looked at Enar with a tired expression. Well, only thing I do know is shouting ain't helping. Reginald deflated, turning away and running a hand over his face. Prime the drive, he said hoarsely. We're going to Wyver. Crace's goons will be there, said Ben. Wyver, said Magnus. An excellent idea. I couldn't agree more. It's nearby. I have multiple contacts. Nobody asked you, said Rowan. She looked at Magnus like he was a disease. She looks at him the way they looked at me and Dendald, thought Sule. If she knew the truth, if Ben knew, would he look at me that way too? It's a risk we'll have to take, said Reginald. We can find new papers in the hive port. Maybe new jobs, some money for repairs and fuel. Anyone else? He looked around them. Good. Drop the sails. We've got ourselves a mess to clean up. Chapter 22. The Architect. Ever been to a hive? The company loves them. The structures grow themselves from intelligent fungus. It consumes everything and shits out a city before it goes dormant. Sometimes there's flare-ups and some poor sod gets turned into a doorway. Can't really complain about it, though. Free supplies. Quilks Yatriba, Fat Ship Captain, year 41,992,667. The world was ringed by a belt of dusty rocks that encircled its equator. There were criss-crossing crevasses dug deep into its gray surface, patches of tan, maroon, purple, and blue blossoming around them. It looked like entire continents were lifting off the surface like a poorly fit puzzle. It had fallen apart if not for the Durabond sutures holding it together, said Jun. The inhabitants are glorified prisoners or criminals. The Empire has no friends here. It's the perfect place to lie low. We're lucky it's close to the heap. Copper Hall's #1 retirement destination for pirates and the depraved, said Ben. Look there, said Chorsk, pointing towards shining points dotted above the ring. Ships, said Reginald. He put his spyglass to his eye and his mouth twitched. Imperial great ships. Some kind of blockade. Wyver is a revisionist mother world, said Magnus. The original heretical hotspot. It's a powder keg, and the fuse was lit long ago. Shall we turn back? Asked Chorsk. We don't have the fuel, said Jun. Drop us under the belt and coast, said Reginald. Lower sails on dorsal, maintain on ventral. The shadow will give us cover. You'll want to bring us to Borhath, said Magnus. In the core to the east of the central pyres. There's someone there I mean to see. We're not here to help you, said Reginald. And why in the seven hells should we trust you? Jun's voice was like ice. Because, said Magnus, he's probably the only one in this entire hive not greedy enough to turn you in the moment it's figured out who you are. It's only a matter of time until every bounty hunter in the rim knows your faces. Sule frowned and looked up as the belt rocks passed above like small mountains. Through the dust and shifting rock she watched the great ship nearest to them. It hung there motionless. Its armored hull shimmered and its vast orbital sails were fully unfurled, curved petals as long as the vessel itself. The small shapes of flyers moved between them and out towards the other vessels, still shining beacons far in the distance. Steady now, said Reginald. No signal lights from the blockade? Nothing. They slowed as the aether thickened to air and the great ship paled against the orange-tinged sky. They followed the black scar across a large swath of the equatorial belt. Try up to my dust, said Magnus as Sule watched the mineral-colored landscape glide past below. It's what's left after they drain a world's sap. Mitre tar oozes from every crack. They refine it down for trace elements and lotus salts. It's used in everything from alchemical manufacturing to the cosmetics you rub on your face. Once the tar comes, the world is like a plant with rotting roots. It's as good as dead. Chorsk narrowed the sails and the Sophie's lights flickered on, and they dove down into one of the cracks. And Sule saw light where there should be darkness, that between the ravine there was no base, that beyond was a cavernous expanse of columns of twisting rock, connected by ropes and drifting cities as the Sophie danced between suspended mountains the size of moons. It's nearly hollow, she said in awe. Like a geode, said Ben, but instead of crystals you get that. He pointed at the brutalist gray stone structures of a glowing city as they passed over. Great smokestacks rose high into the interior, spewing sickly brown smoke that Sule had seen leaking from the crevasses from orbit. It smelled of iron, like blood. Borhath rested in the distance, a city of stone carved from the world's bedrock where its core used to be. Columns encircled its perimeter which ships drifted through. The towers of the city climbed from below and above, many meeting in the middle. There, said Reginald. He pointed to a towering beehive-looking structure emerging from the base of an overhanging rock. For a small price they don't remember, and no questions. We can get lost there. The old girl will be safe. Who exactly is this friend of yours? Jun asked, turning to Magnus. No, said Reginald, we're not going there. The moment we land, the Alcuer is gone. An architect of sorts, said Magnus. He's no friend of the Empire. He has a place we can stay, asked Jun. Beds, contacts, privacy. More than adequate facilities, said Magnus. Jun looked at Reginald. No, said Reginald. Captain, said Jun, you only make friends in Borhath if you've got two things, gold or notoriety. We only got one, and it ain't the good kind. It's not the Alcuer's fault that the revisionists botched the execution. I say we see who this architect is. The starport loomed below them, rings upon rings of encircling hangars lined with ships. Stone platforms speckled with buildings were connected by durwood trusses and more of the support lines. Long, spindly boom arms ferried the containers to waiting cargo scows as the echoes of blare horns rose with the steam from girders below. There was no bottom to the structure. It was suspended like a nest, and if Sule were to fall, she wondered if she'd ever stop. They found an empty berth. There was a thud, and the Sophie was still. "Sule, John, with me," said Reginald. "The rest of you see if you can't find us some food and proper repairs." "How long are you expecting to be away?" asked Chorsk. John looked to Magnus, who raised his eyebrows. "A day or two at most," he said. 2 days is too long. If we aren't back in 24 hours, assume we're dead and abandon the ship. Blend in, find a new crew. The Sophie isn't safe," said Reginald. "Real funny, Captain," said Ben. "We aren't leaving the Sophie behind." "I mean it," said Reginald. "If things go south and we're spotted by the Greys," he grimaced, "or Crace's goons, or the revisionists, or plaguers, or bounty hunters, first thing they'll do is check the ports. Ina, pack up, you're coming too." "Least we can do while we wait is give her a new coat of paint," said Felix, emerging from the deck to lean on the doorway. "I say we find a nice, deep black." "You don't paint my ship black," said Reginald, "and that's the last I want it brought up." "Fits the wanted fugitive theme," muttered Felix, crossing his arms. "If you want to paint her, it's the same color. You hear?" "Loud and clear, Captain," said Felix. The flyer dropped from the Sophie's hull, pulling away and quickly accelerating towards the other side of the city. "I can't believe people would want to live here," said Sule. "They don't have a choice," said Magnus. "Borhath and by extension the entire planet are assigned birthright labor quotas. Work, get a place to sleep, something to eat. Don't work, die. There are so many people here, it's like an ant hive. There's no room for the elderly or cripples or slackers. They simply die off." "That's awful," said Sule. "It's life," said Reginald. "You were lucky on Toldrum being a fringe world, just isolated for them not to care. Some houses are more lenient outside their capitals, but the baseline for ruthlessness is set by Grail. Everyone has to conform or face the consequences." "You are treated better as a criminal," snorted Enar. "More honor in rejecting slavery." "Is living in a big sewer worth the honor?" asked Sule. Enar growled. "Sometimes people fight back," said Jun, "but it never ends well for anyone. You saw the ships in orbit. It only takes a generation or two before the people forget the horrors and try again, and every time they are slaughtered like cattle." "It'll work this time, though, eh?" said Reginald. They passed the innermost ring, a moat in the city superstructure that floated over a void and vanished in shadow. There was an immediate shift. The streets became clean, the windows large, and the flyers that flew by started to look sleek and expensive. "What about the people in this part of the city?" asked Sule. "Off-worlders mostly. The bureaucratic elite and the management from the company that kiss Grail's feet," said Reginald. "What's the company?" asked Sule. "Sometimes I forget you aren't a spacer," said Reginald. "They've been wiped from the books. The company was the largest mercantile entity in the deep. About a millennia ago, give or take, they had a complete monopoly on trade in the Rim, and a lot of other places too." "And not anymore?" said Sule. "They grew too big, started challenging claims by the houses, and built their own navy. Towards the end, they were hiring their own privateers to go after their own ships in middle management disputes," said Reginald. "One of Grail's lackeys came after them." "What did Grail do?" "What do you think he did?" said Reginald. "He did what he always does, called them like sick marmots. The ones that survived still call themselves the company, but it's just an honorific now. A few rogue privateer captains, a few worlds like this one." They passed back outside the ring into the industrial slums. Sule could see what looked like crowds of people below. Some carried torches, and fires burned in the streets, along with a few houses. Looks like people aren't so happy, said Sule as they coasted around a column of dark smoke. Jun counted her fingers. News from the Rose would have reached here by now. I'm sure one of the 9 disappearing hasn't helped the mood. There, said Magnus, pointing to a building half cast in stone. It was one of the thousands set into the cliff of a pyre rising above the city. Set us down there. They drew up alongside the docking pier, and Sule helped to tie the flyer down. Then Jun and Reginald pulled their guns, and they followed Magnus to the simple door embedded in the rock face. There's no need for those, said Magnus. Call me cautious, said Reginald. Magnus pressed his hand to the lock and closed his eyes. Sule could see the air bend within the locket as the strand twisted about, and then a moment later it opened with a click. They peered inside, and then, seeing only a wall, they looked down at the slide that twisted away in a corkscrew motion. I refuse to be insulted by such an entrance, said Enar. Not honorable enough for you, said Magnus. A warrior does not slide on a toy into battle, said Enar. I don't think you'd fit anyways, said Sule. Magnus peered at the organtulan and the slide. She's right, he said. You should stay and guard the flyer. Separating us for the kill. Enar's brows bent in anger. Indeed, said Magnus as he jumped into the slide and vanished. Sule made up her mind and followed him before Reginald or Jun could decide otherwise. The slide twisted around, and then Sule was greeted by darkness. Only the faintest slivers of light leaked through hairline cracks. Magnus was already standing. She could see the faint outline of his hand as he tapped his finger against the metal wall, and the lanterns sparked to life in rapid succession down a long, narrow corridor. Reginald appeared at the end of the slide behind her and rose to his feet. June followed close behind. Magnus cupped his hands to his mouth. Langram! He shouted. His voice echoed back to them. A head appeared at the end of the corridor. Who's there? Said the man that Sule presumed was Langram. His hair was gray and short, and the deep lines of his face caught the light. Magnus? Said Langram, stepping into view. Is that you? Yes, old friend. I thought you'd be fatter, said Langram. He looked at Sule. Who are they? He said suspiciously. Friends, said Magnus. It's been years, said Langram. I figured you'd died, or worse. When you last left, you took the Torclesians. Langram fell silent and looked at Magnus, his face filled with unspoken questions. Did you do it? He said, looking between them. Did they work? Do you have it? Magnus walked forwards, his expression flat, until he was face to face with Langram, who had begun to look at him with a kind of awe. A wide grin split Magnus's face. No, said Langram, and Magnus grabbed his shoulders. No, said Langram enthusiastically, grabbing Magnus's shoulders in return, and they shook each other. You have the key. Magnus pressed his forehead against Langram's and yelled as they shook each other some more. When were you planning on sharing this with us, exactly? Said Reginald. Incredible, said Langram, watching the glowing sliver twist above Magnus's palm. Who did you take it from? One of the generals. Jezebel. Magnus coughed. Marvelous, said Langram. Then his eyes widened and he looked up. Who? Jezebel Adara, said Sule. Jun had returned from the ship with the rest of the crew, ignoring Langram's protests, and they'd now gathered around in a room with tables covered in glass globules that looked suspiciously like the one Magnus had used in the scaffold. It's a long story, said Magnus. The opportunity presented itself, and I had the amber jade. I decided this is the god's rank key, said Langram. You're joking. When Magnus didn't budge, Langram stumbled away. What? How? How did you get away? Where is she? Dead, I think, though her mind is currently possessing the body of a revisionist general inside a living son, said Reginald. I. Langram looked like he might be about to faint. Dead? How did you manage to escape the Rose, even with the scaffold, surely? We fled through the Orowad, said Jorsk, through the Ma. The Ma? You can't be serious, said Langram. You're pulling my ear. Nobody makes it through that place alive. There wasn't time to go around, said Magnus. No, I don't suppose there would be, said Langram. If what you say is true, this changes everything. Or nothing. It unlocks possibilities. Langram clapped his hands. But now, where are my manners? You need a place to stay, is that right? Somewhere to wait out the storm. Well, there's no better place than Borhath, I can assure you of that. You better be right, said Jun. She slammed down a stack of torn papers on the table. Sule swallowed as she saw her face and the faces of the rest of the crew staring back at her from the pages. Wanted, said the text in big blood-red letters, for impersonation of a lord, murder, and heresy. They lie, said Enar. Hey, that picture of me isn't half bad, said Ben, grabbing his paper. Enar cocked his head, and then grabbed his own photo. He stared at it for a moment. The painter is very skilled. Jun tapped the reward amount, and Ben looked ill. That's enough to make your own mother sell you out. We need to disappear, fast. That's quite impressive, said Reginald. It is a great honor to be considered such a worthy threat, rumbled Enar, seemingly quite pleased with himself. Oh dear, said Langram. And your ship, where did you dock her? Reginald told him, and he nodded thoughtfully. It's not the worst place, not the best either. It's too late now, though. Better not to risk moving. Langram got back to his feet and moved his hands above his head. Too many eyes. Speaking of eyes, is anyone hungry? I've got some cooking. We should return to the ship, said Reginald. Do you have sausages? Asked Sule. She licked her lips at the thought of Peruvian poached eyeballs. With butter. Yes, said Langram. Fresh, spiced? Whatever you like. Sule turned to Reginald, her eyes large. Reginald pulled Magnus to the side. So this architect is another one of your old friends we're supposed to trust with our lives? He's very good at hiding, said Magnus quietly, and right now his interests align with ours. Reginald looked away, then back, with a sigh of resignation. Suppose we could all do with a good meal, he said. A good bath would be nice, said John. I stink like fire and ash. It's no trouble, asked Reginald. None whatsoever, said Langram. That is, as long as you tell me your tale. Sule helped herself, slurping up wriggling Evosian eels on toasted bread, closing her eyes in bliss. Rowan hadn't touched her food, and all the attention was currently on her. You shaved your hair, said Jun. Felt right, said Rowan with dark circles under her eyes. Was just getting in the way. Sule watched Rowan with concern. She wasn't sure how to help, but she felt that she should. But Rowan had been giving her the cold shoulder since Miro. Reginald and Ben had by far the worst of anyone's table manners, scarfing potatoes and gravy with their bare hands. Enar, Sule was shocked to see, ate everything with a knife and a fork with a cloth tucked into his shirt. Langram watched the crew from his seat at the end of the table. Behind him was the rear of the tower, a large clock face where the hands slowly ticked. They had just finished telling him their story in its entirety. A marvelous tale, started Langram, gazing into the distance as he set down his fork. If I was a believer, I would say you have a guardian angel, but pray you never meet an actual angel. Langram shuddered. Oh, monstrous creatures, angels. We've shared our stories, said Reginald. Now, for all the trouble, we'd like to hear yours, if you'd be so kind. Langram rubbed the bridge of his nose. Yes, I suppose it's only fair. He sat back and looked out through the cloudy white glass of the clock at the city below. I was always something of a rebel, he began after a moment. I joined the Imperial Academy when I was young, very young. It was not my own choice. At first I was a drive engineer, but quickly I was steered towards Alcurix. I was taught some of the Empire's most prized secrets, namely one above all else, scope travel. Gates, muttered Reginald under his breath. The Empire's most impenetrable fortresses, their great wayward gates and the deeply hidden secret behind them. The more I learned, the more I realized what had been hidden by the gods, the more I learned how much I did not know, and the more disillusioned I became. I began to experiment, not only to learn what was known, but to discover. I found ways to resist Grail's stupor, combinations of psychoactive compounds of my own design. Hypnosis, taking jobs far from the interact in any temple in the rim. I pushed boundaries. I questioned why. Until Langram put his wrists together and slammed his fists into the table. Until I went too far, he said sadly. I was branded a heretic by my fellows. I was expelled from the academy, for I had become a man of science. Enoch jumped to his feet. You, he said, pointing. You are a scientist. Well, yes, said Langram. Enoch narrowed his eyes and began to reach for his gun. No, said Reginald, rising and putting his arms out. This is a good scientist. Right now. He looked to Langram. Yes, said Langram, looking mildly confused. I don't trust him, said Enoch gruffly, but he sat down anyway. As I was saying, continued Langram, I was imprisoned to be executed, but fate had other plans. You escaped, whispered Sule. Langram's grey eyebrows lifted. And a marvelous escape it was. I had nearly lost all hope, but I had managed to smuggle in my person the greatest of Alcuric inventions, as it was small enough to hide. Alas, I was missing a power source. So it was then that fate would have it. I was not alone in my cell. 'Twas I, said Magnus. How is it you can get in the same cell as an imperial heretic? Asked John. I may have briefly attended the Imperial Academy on Parthis, said Magnus. I was only a boy then, sprightly, foolish, handsome, but not foolish enough to show my power. If I had, I would have been swept away to some hell world to be trained, abused until I was a remorseless weapon. I had to express myself in other ways. Naturally, it led to some trouble. He tried to bed the sub-rector's daughter, sighed Langram. I merely indulged her, said Magnus. The crime of seduction was false. Your device, said Sule. It was the chips, wasn't it? The chips? The Torclesians, yes. They do look a bit like coins, said Langram. It's like the scope gates, but on a micro scale. They still need a power source, which an Alcure can provide. Langram and Magnus. Oh, such memories. What an adventure that was. He looked around the dining space, surrounded on all sides by shelves of books and scrolls. I have since dedicated my life to perfecting my craft. Despite the great length the gods have gone to keep the Empire stable, there have been cracks like frayed ends. The fall of Loka in House Durrell was the beginning of the end. The assassination of the demigod prince and then Jezebel. We've all felt it. Don't you agree? Nothing works quite like it used to, said Jun. Can't lie. The war broke something. Somewhere. The houses have stood for millions of years. Why not another million more? Said Felix. It seems to me like they have a pretty good system worked out. Why try to tear it down? There's worse things out there. Fool, said Enar loudly. Then he went back to dissecting a potato with his fork, cutting it into perfect little slices. I'm the fool, said Felix, his eyes flashing. You don't know the first thing about me. Look at you. Please. Over so much time, it's inevitable. There's no such thing as a perfect system, said Magnus. The world evolves, it moves on. The gods have managed to stall its progress. It's a rotten shell, a crumbling castle of excess and suffering. The only thing holding the empire together now is Grail. They're too detached from our reality. Yes, exactly, said Langram. Grail's influence comes in a very physical sense, from the cradle, the heart of his domain. It warps the laws of the universe in his favor, transmitted through the gates and the temples where they exist. It is like fighting a force of nature. How does the key fit into this? Asked Felix. That, Langram looked at Magnus, is something I've been working on. I need it for one of my experiments. I discussed it with Magnus before he left. It has the potential to free the rim of Grail's influence, but the specifics need work. I'd sell it for gold is what I'd do, said Jun. Something like that has to be worth something. Maybe we can make a deal with Crace after all. I may have exaggerated its usefulness in my conversations with Crace, said Magnus thoughtfully. Langram shook his head. The only people who would buy something like that are Imperial agents, right before they stick a knife in your back. Now, make yourselves at home and do not venture if you can help it. There have been secret police and Imperials at every corner since the blockade began. He peered out through the window of the clock and the dull flashes far below. I've never seen it this bad before. You better stay the night, continued Langram. Whenever there's riots, the garrison gets itchy trigger fingers. You're lucky nobody took a shot at you. It usually boils over in a few days. If you're lucky, it'll be safe to fly tomorrow. I have plenty of beds. We'd better not, started Reginald. We'd be honored, said Jun. Now about that bath. Edar then pushed back his chair and stood, throwing back his head and letting out a roar. Just about everyone in the room jumped in their seats, except for Reginald, who rolled his eyes. I, too, am honored, said Enar. The meal was delicious. Chapter 23. What Gods Fear. The sacrifice of billions is a small price to pay for the survival of trillions. There is always a place in eternity for those who serve, by life or by death. York Vasting, Imperial General, year 42,423,990. Sule woke. A distant rumble shook the glass of the window panes. Dust drifted down from the ceiling, and the faint, acrid smell of smoke filled her nose. The riots had failed to calm over the past days. If anything, it had gotten worse. There was something about the light that looked off, setting her on edge as she clambered out of bed. Far in the distance, an orange glow flickered. The faint sound of yelling and pops rang out in the night. Then, as she watched, a brilliant flash lit the distant buildings, and another. She shielded her eyes as two colossal balls of blue fire rose ominously into the sky. Her eyes widened. What? Duck, said Samuel. Sule ducked. The window shattered, and she covered her head protectively as pulverized glass rained down over her as she huddled against the floor. The building shook to the point where dust rained from the ceiling. "Sule!" a voice yelled. The door to the room was thrown open and Reginald barged inside, his head swinging back and forth as he looked for her. He rushed to her, helping her to her feet. "You're all right. We have to go. Now." There was enough smoke to make them cough as they entered Langram's study. He was rushing about in a panic, collecting rolls of paper, throwing it all into 2 overstuffed travel cases. "What's going on?" shouted Ben. "The revolt!" cried Langram. "The news of Jezebel's supposed death must have sent people over the edge. I can't believe this. Of all the times, all my work—" "I believe the structure is on fire," said Magnus calmly. "There is no time to pack." "We can take my flyer," said Langram. "Quick!" He tossed the cases to Reginald. "The lower dock. Hurry!" They opened a door as they coughed, and a wall of flames met them. "This way!" yelled Langram. They turned and rushed down a different flight of stairs, emerging into open air. Half of the building was gone, engulfed in flames. As Sule watched, a frame of flaming wood that was previously a flyer collapsed in a pile of embers. It mixed with the drizzle of rain, sizzling and crackling as a wave of sweat-inducing heat washed over them. Reginald cursed. "One for you, and one for you, and one—" Langram made his way around, handing out silver packages with straps like a rucksack as a wall of fire blew out the door where they'd just come. He pulled out the straps from his own silver bundle, putting it around his arms, motioning for them to do the same. "Now you see," he began, "I have just the thing for this situation. A contingency. It is important that—" And then something fell from the base of the platform and there was a crack. And they were falling. Sule tumbled in a slow somersault through the air, the ground rushing up towards her so fast there wouldn't be time to think, let alone process, that she was about to die. Something stirred inside her, and for the briefest of moments she was utterly convinced she'd had wings once. Then there was a whoomp, and she jerked upwards just as she was about to hit a building. Sule looked about herself and saw that she had silver wings of a kind. The rucksack had ballooned outwards in a geometric arrangement of repulsion silk, and it fluttered about as Sule stumbled down into the street, into a mob of panicked families and screaming children. A blinding spotlight lit the ground from above as a ship passed over. A siren blared incessantly. Above them the buildings on the stone column burned bright. The orange light flickered across the stone sky, masked by thick brown clouds. She caught sight of the others landing not far away. Sule dropped the pack and ran to them as she was buffeted by bodies. "Everyone all right?" yelled Reginald. "There's nothing quite like a live fire test," yelled Langram gleefully as he came to rest before them, trailing silver. A flaming fireball that might very well have been his home rained down into the building behind him, crushing it. "There's something wrong here," Reginald muttered. "This is no revolt." It was chaos in the streets. Carts collided. People screamed. "People aren't rioting," said Sule, turning. "They're running." "From who?" asked Langram. "Should we stay?" Sule asked. "Chorsk'll be looking for us in the flyer." "He'll never find us," said Ben, "assuming he can leave the ship at all." "We can reach the shipyard in under 2 hours by foot," said Magnus, "if we run." "I have no intention of sticking around to find out what stirred up this ruckus," said Reginald. A decision was made, and they moved quickly, doing their best to push their way through the stampede of people. Sule saw that the flow was generally moving in the same direction that they were, towards the spaceports. They reached a crater of rubble that had previously been several city blocks. The fading embers spit and popped. Buildings burned fiercely at the edges of the destruction. It was clear that there was no attempt being made to quench the blaze. "It would take too long to go around," said Langram wearily. Reginald took the lead, and they followed him into the destruction. After a time, they had left the crowds behind to the streets. Sule heard voices up ahead. They paused, and Reginald put a finger to his lips. They peered around the ruin of a building. "So did you get a good look at it?" the tall one was saying uncertainly. "Did I get a good look?" he says. "It was some kind of demon, a dog, but you could see right through it. Nothing like I've ever seen. It was running right through us." He shuddered. Left people just lying there." There was a woman with them. Her hair was a ruddy red, and her face looked like it had recently gotten an unhealthy helping of sun. She was wearing a uniform like the others, and they were walking by, searching through the rubble. "I know what I saw," retorted a stocky man angrily. "The Major had us ignite all the sap to try to stop the damn thing. Sacrificed most of the detachment doing it, too." "They probably blinded half the city," said the woman hotly. "My face will be peeling, and that fuel was for the presenter of justice. The captain's going to be pissed." "We had bigger problems than that damn ship," snapped the tall one. "Besides, we drove it off, we did, whatever it was. Those bloody fools had no idea what they were chasing when they went after it. I tried to warn them, I did." The lanky man stopped the other with the arm on his shoulder. "What do you mean, drove it off? The explosion didn't kill it." "I said nothing could touch it. It's like it was there, but it wasn't there. But it was there." "Olin, you aren't making any sense." Sule's attention had slowly moved away from the trio. The distant sounds of the distressed city had vanished one by one until the sounds of struggle had all but disappeared. Even the air had stilled. There was no movement anywhere. There was only the sound of the rain as it splashed relentlessly against the rubble. The clouds had moved in, obscuring the wider city in a muddy haze. An unexplainable terror crept up Sule's spine as she peered into the dim streets behind her, looking for any sign of life from where she'd just come. There was something distressingly wrong about the stillness. It reminded her of the desert and the witch. This time she could see the usually loose lines of the world tightening and drawing close together. "Not again," she thought. "Can it just be my imagination this once?" "As the world pass close, even the dead know fear," said Samuel. What is that supposed to mean? Sule thought back. "Steel yourself." Sule gulped and prodded Reginald. She nodded back the way they had come. His eyes narrowed. "What is it?" hissed Langram. "The city's gone quiet," whispered Reginald. "Wait, shut up a second, Olin. Isolde," interrupted Lanky. "Hear what?" "Exactly." Sule's eyes were glued back the way she had come. There was something there. Whatever the Imperials had tried to stop, it must still be in the city. Sule's back was pressed against the sandwood rubble. It was hard to breathe, like the air had become a thick blanket smothering her. The fire in the burning buildings grew dim, as though starved of oxygen themselves. A haze rushed for them down the slope. As it reached them, the rain paused its fall, droplets of water suspended above the ground like a heavy mist. Then, in absolute silence, creatures not much smaller than a human emerged from the shadows of the ruined streets, hesitantly as if afraid. Each had a head that looked like a mix between a dog and a fox, stretched and thin. The creatures were each linked to a thin, undulating tendril that trailed out behind them like a transparent umbilical cord. It disappeared back into the city. Some dived through the air, leaving paths in the suspended water, which moved apart and drifted in little eddies. Each eyeless head had a faint glowing ember in their center. They were sniffing the air like a pack of wolves, intent on a search for something. One touched the ground. As it did so, it sprouted legs, digging into the rubble. To Sule's horror, it pulled out a broken body. It was limp and its limbs twisted. The fox thing sniffed, and then plunged itself into the chest like a striking snake. A moment later, a new faintly glowing ember slid up the tendril, which split suddenly, quickly forming a second fox that drifted beside the first. It let loose a chilling howl. "Olin, you daft bastard! That's not a dog!" cried Timon. "Quiet, you fool!" hissed Isolde. "Wraith," whispered Magnus. "They wouldn't. Not here," said Reginald. "Who is that? Who's there?" "Forever are the spirits of death," said Samuel. Sule bolted before the soul-drained body touched the ground. "Sule!" Sule ignored the exclamations of the surprised guards and the crew as she clambered over the pile. Behind her, the wraith grew as more foxes joined the others. Embers lit one by one from the shadows like 1,000 glowing eyes, flowing together as they swept into the crater. The few unfortunate guards caught unaware, marveling at the lights, were swallowed, their screams cut short as they were engulfed by the silent eyes. Muted cracks of gunshots filled the air. The crew and the trio of soldiers joined Sule in her sprint towards the spaceport. She jumped through a thin wall of water stuck mid-pour from a roof, sliding precariously over muddy cobblestones as she tried to right herself. This wasn't her terror. No, not alone. It was Samuel's. His fear coursed through her, and it became her own. Resist. Not against this. The roads were littered with corpses with unseeing eyes. Their skin looked cold and ashen. Children lay among the fallen parents. Not one was moving. Sule looked behind her. The ethereal foxes bounded along the walls, overtaking them. She reached an open ditch and leapt, slipping in the mud, and then slid to a stop. She was floating in a sea of fiery eyes cast around her in every direction. Their unblinking gaze prickled and burned against her skin. Sule tried to speak, but no words formed in her throat. Reginald cursed. His voice was stretched and slow. "I will not return," said Samuel. Panic blasted in Sule's mind. Her eyes darted back around as she spun in a slow circle. They backed away towards a wall. Every step felt like she was forcing her way through thick mud, like in a nightmare where she couldn't run. The foxes sniffed the air. They began to yip and cry as they rushed around her, dancing in a tightening circle, the haunting sound that was almost human. Flickers of a dream, of the same eyes in a long submerged rage. This creature was of chaos, but she was of intention and order. She knew the eyes. She knew... "I remember now," said Samuel. "I remember who I was." Sule stood mid-step, frozen in air so dense that she could feel it running into her lungs like water, vibrating her very being. Reginald and the others were frozen behind her. Their clocks stopped. Even Magnus was frozen in time, his face twisted into a grim mask. I could almost..." One of the foxes danced forwards and sniffed Sule. When it touched her, it was so cold that it burned. "Then do something," Sule thought desperately. "You must be the one to," came the reply. "As much as I'd like to, I cannot control your will." They were drawing nearer to the others. The brighter the eyes, the darker the world became. It swept through the greys from the ruins, who were furthest, consuming their souls as it drew closer. "You must remember." Her grin in the mirror, and the Uzgorak's Magnus slithering through her mind. There was a part of herself she'd drawn on. Something dark. Something that was new. Or had it always been there? The addictive power she had felt in the maw when she'd taken Jezebel's soul shivered down her spine. Her head tingled, her fatigue vanished, and for a moment she felt like she could crush a mountain in her fist. She stepped forward, free of the pressing influence, and the wraith darted back, yipping in its strange language. Sule could see her eyes glinted like a cat's in the reflection of a puddle. "Stay back!" yelled Sule. The fox things danced back as if in surprise that she could talk at all. "Good," said Samuel. "Now, allow me." The many eyes flickered in agitation. "Immortalem," came the voice. The words were twisted into sense as Samuel pulled on her mind. A hideous, quavering resonance rattled Sule to her core. "Thaldavir, we are the cinder. We must feed. We must grow. We are Thaldavir. One must be all." The cinder lifted its snouts to the sky and howled, an otherworldly song that made Sule grind her teeth together. It lunged, not at her, but at her friends. "No," growled Sule. Sule could feel a change. Her vision sharpened, her body felt light. A memory flooded her mind, and she followed the action without thinking. The air hummed and her bones ached as she latched her consciousness onto the frantic rhythm of the strand. Sule pulled on the fabric of the world, tightening it even further until it snapped. The cinder rushed her and Sule spun. Threads came undone. She threw up her hand and a bolt of white lightning arced from her finger and connected with the closest hound. The arc spread in a flash, growing like a living thing. Sule's fingers felt like they'd been plunged into hot coals and the very air burned white, bursting bodies into orange protoplasm. She twisted her fingers instinctively the way Samuel had taught her, pulling the arc along, spinning the threads through the air like a weaver spinning light. It came easier. Now every movement felt like she'd done it before. There was a pain crawling up her arms, building between her shoulders. Between the flashes, she saw black quills push from her flesh, contorting beneath her clothes, undoing her. It did not stop her. Nothing would stop her now. She only wanted more to... The cinder screamed. Then, as if it were a passing wave, the air changed and Sule shuddered, and she collapsed against the cobblestones as vertigo overtook her. The mass of the cinder slid back and the heaviness abated, its many bodies snarling as it sank into the stone of the buildings, leaving her curled about herself. "Sule," someone was shaking her. "Did it hurt you?" It was Reginald. "Are you all right?" Sule groaned. Her body ached. She felt so weak. "I'm fine," she croaked. "What happened?" said Langram. "Those creatures were there. The air like molasses. I could taste it. And then they were gone." "Was it you, Magnus?" asked Ben. "No, but we aren't dead, so we can ask questions later," said Magnus. "The port isn't far now." Magnus had pulled a sword that looked suspiciously like the one Sule had stopped to see before in Crace's club. Reginald knelt down. "Grab onto my back," he said. Sule wrapped her arms around his neck and he hoisted her up. Sule caught glimpses of amber eyes watching as they made their way through the silent streets, jumping over bodies. The cinder darted in and out of windows. The yipping began to rise in volume as they sprinted, Sule bouncing along on Reginald's back. They were the furthest behind, and it seemed Langram certainly kept in shape. "How close are they?" grunted Reginald. "You don't want to know," Sule said as Reginald dodged corpses and fallen bricks. They turned along another street, Langram pointing and shouting. She finally saw the entrance to the spaceport, a long bridge. At the entrance there was a line of Greys and city guards huddled behind a makeshift pile of crushed buildings, their rifles raised. "Halt!" one of them cried. "They're alive, not bloody walking corpses," said an older man with a gray beard. "Let them pass. You out there, get out of the way. We're about to blow this place to dust." "They're coming back!" yelled one of the Greys. Sule turned to look behind them. The eyes brightened as the cinder coalesced into existence, pulling itself from the wood and the stone, gliding along the building walls and streets from every direction. "Get down!" a Grey cried as Reginald sprinted to reach a pile of rubble. Sule fell to the side just as a deafening sound filled the night as the street behind them vanished in a brilliant white light. She screwed her eyes shut, but it made little difference. A blast wave struck, pressing her into the ground. The cinder let out a bone-rattling screech, louder than the roar of the wind, louder than the blast that set her ears ringing. All around her, objects were being pulled towards the source of the light, rolling precariously along the ground, slipping and sliding. Sule's stomach lurched, and while the light lasted, she felt the wall become like the floor as the gravity shifted. The explosion was pulling her, too. The sensation faded with the light. The soldiers around her rose to their feet, and Sule cautiously turned with the others to observe the smoldering crater and the flattened buildings. The ground roiled in a distortion of heat, and the mud looked like it had been turned to glass as a cloud of steam rolled over them. "That's the last of the sap," said someone behind Sule. "Think we got it for good this time," said another. "We bought time," said the old man with a tired expression. "Go," he said to them. "This world does not have long. We'll hold it back as long as we can." "Thank you," said Reginald. "May the gods grant us mercy." The port was filled with crowds of desperate people, clamoring to get on the remaining ships as they cut their lines and drifted up into the sky. "There she is," sighed Reginald. "Still there," said Langram. "Your crew is loyal." Einar stood in front of a crowd of people. The Organtulan towered above them. He did not look happy. "You let us on right now, or there's going to be trouble," someone yelled from the crowd, if a little half-heartedly. "My mother is the Queen of Yardo Reach. I have a right to—" They made a path through the crowd until they were standing behind a mud-caked merchant and his servants, who were attempting to bribe Jun with a large basket of jewelry. When she saw them, she let out a gasp of relief. "I worried," said Jun. "Shouldn't have," said Reginald. "What's the trouble?" asked Jun. "People are telling all kinds of stories. Something about ghosts?" "We got a damn wraith," said Reginald, "and we got no time." Jun paled. There was the crack of a gun, and the crowd cried out and cringed away. Reginald stood up on a crate, his pistol raised. "Listen up," Reginald yelled. "We ain't got room for everyone, so we have to make some tough choices. Women and children first. Then we see. Then the young gentlemen. Make trouble, face the fire." He pointed at the merchant. "You, back of the line." The crowd muttered and began to board the Sophie, looking fearfully at Einar as they passed. Then Sule heard the howl, and her blood chilled. "There!" yelled Einar. Like liquid amber, the cinder flowed below them into the port. Its foxes swept over the crowds along the docks, silencing the cries in an instant. Dying sparks were pulled into the maelstrom which glimmered in the darkness. 1,000 more angry eyes looked upwards. "Let's go, let's go!" yelled Reginald, waving everyone aboard as the crowd rushed forward with panic and screams. Sule watched as too many people piled onto another ship, which tilted, dumping its passengers into the monster below. Sule looked away. Reginald fired into the air and the line stopped, looking at the barrel of the gun. "No more," said Reginald, backing up the Sophie's plank. "You can't leave us here," said a woman. "Ship's full," said Reginald. "I'm sorry." Einar pulled the plank and Reginald waved for Chorsk to take off. The Sophie climbed slowly. Several people rushed forwards and clung desperately to the railing, some screaming as they fell. Across the port, some jumped intentionally to their deaths, only to realize their mistake, screaming as they were swallowed by the cinder. The cinder split and jumped to a ship that hadn't risen high enough. The crew collapsed, their bodies contorted and limp. Thousands of the creatures leapt upwards into the air on their translucent tendrils, reaching for the Sophie, but too late. Sule ducked as a glowing orange bolt from the sky zipped past with a blinding speed, striking the ship that had been overwhelmed by the wraith, transforming it into a burning wreck that plummeted to the ground. The clap of thunder followed. High above, an Imperial frigate drifted in and out of the smoke. Another ship was hit straight on and dropped below as it was hollowed out by the explosion. Damn the gods! Yelled Reginald. A cannon bolt narrowly missed them, turning the spaceport's great wall into a collapsing mountain of rubble. The Sophie listed, and people cried out as they slid along the deck. Chorsk spun the wheel and pulled a lever, and the ship righted itself as the drive roared to life, pulling them to the deck as the sails inflated. As the city fell away behind them, the cinder finished its work, and the spaceport was still. The eyes seemed to be watching Sule, calling for her to come back. She stared into them, hypnotized by the dreadful sight until her view was obscured by a veil of smoke. The crew were as silent as the city, only a few listening to the cries and coughs as the ship creaked in the wind, stone walls sliding by at a rapid clip. As they passed through the clouds, Sule could see millions of tiny amber lights expanding. Their growth was exponential as they moved out across the cities and suspended structures like a glowing mold. Minutes later, the Sophie was free of Wyver, rising into the deep beyond. "They really did it," said Jun. "They killed the planet." "Not just killed," said Magnus grimly. "What you see is a fate worse than death." Reginald looked down at Wyver, or what had been. Now from every crack in the continents, the wraith light seeped. He watched the planet, his face twitching with rage. "We aren't in the clear yet," said Jun as a shadow covered the deck. The massive hulk of a great ship filled their view. The glimmer of fighters flooded from its hangars. Instead of running, the other escaping ships fled towards the vessel, perhaps in some ill-gotten hope that it would lead to their salvation. It did not, as they learned in fire. "Looks all burned through," said Reginald quietly, gazing up at the great ship.